This is from a book I'm working on right now about stopping rape culture. Ketanji Brown Jackson is the most recent US Supreme Court justice. She's an African-American woman, we think. We can't be too sure though, because when asked during the confirmation hearings if she could define what is a woman, she answered that she could not. The liberal mainstream press described her answer as, answer should be in quotes, as a brilliant evasion of a gotcha question. But it's really a measure of the debasement of the political system, the judicial system, and mainstream corporate discourse that words brilliant and evasion can be used together in this context. How is being evasive in a Supreme Court confirmation hearing ever a good thing? I would like to know a nominee's positions, whether or not I agree with those positions. Does the nominee support or oppose the death penalty in certain cases? Does the nominee still hold positions she articulated in this or that paper she wrote decades ago? If I were a nominee, I would expect to be asked hostile questions about whether I support bringing down civilization, to which I would respond, civilization, which I define as a way of life based on the growth of cities, is destroying life on the planet. The sooner civilization comes down, the more life will remain for those who come after. So yes, I do want it to come down sooner rather than later. And it will collapse in any case. If we tell the truth about our circumstances and manage this collapse, the process will be less painful. And we may be able to save more of what we love than if we continue to lie to each other and ourselves and continue to make things worse up to and including through the collapse. If that were to cost me my place on the Supreme Court, so be it. At least I would still have my integrity. She could have answered with similar honesty, but she chose not to. I want any Supreme Court justice to have the courage to tell the truth, consequences be damned. Contrast her non-answer with the answer of Chief Justice of the Court of the King's Bench, Lord Mansfield, in the famous Somerset's case regarding the legality of slavery in England. When told that ruling against slavery's legality might destroy the English economy, he responded, "Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall." That's the sort of courage I want from any jurist. A lot of liberals argued that she made her evasion under pressure, and that had she acknowledged that a woman is an adult human female, she would have not been confirmed for the Supreme Court. But she wasn't under real pressure, not only because there's no way the Democrats would have failed to confirm her, but also because if she somehow wouldn't have been confirmed, she would have retained her then current job as a circuit judge on the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, with a salary of almost $237,000 a year. That's not pressure. Someone once asked the golfer Lee Trevino if he felt pressure putting for a golf championship, and he said no, because even if he missed, he came in second and still made a lot of money. You don't know what pressure is until you played for $5 a hole with only $2 in your pocket, he said. Pressure would be a single mother of three working at a woman's store, being forced to call a male ma'am and pointing toward the women's dressing room when he requests to try on a quinceañera dress, or she'll lose her job. Pressure would be a college woman on a swim team having to not speak out against having to shower with a male for fear she'll be kicked off the team. What does it say about our collective hatred of women that not being able, or more likely willing, to define woman is considered a prerequisite for this woman to become a Supreme Court justice? How can one defend the rights of women if one cannot or will not define what a woman is? And how can one rule on laws if one cannot or will not define the terms, whether those terms are no parking zones, first-degree murder, Supreme Court, or woman? And what does it say about our collective hatred of women that any person could be forced to lie about this definition? Of course, we know what happens to anyone who does speak the unspeakable, who acknowledges that a woman is an adult human female. That person is bombarded with rape and death threats, labeled a bigot and Nazi, probably loses her job and has her life destroyed. So maybe Ketanji Brown Jackson was under pressure. But a lot of us are under pressure without $237,000 a year in safety nets. And we don't let that deter us from telling the truth. That's on her conscience. Jackson isn't the only person who can't or won't define woman. Lefty academics, writers, and journalists have lined up to argue some variant or combination of the following. The word woman is so complex that it's not possible to define. Woman means whatever anybody says it does. A woman is anybody who identifies as a woman. Male and female, man and woman are all on spectrums, and therefore we cannot possibly say what's a woman. that it's bigoted to attempt to define woman. Woman is a word, and words mean whatever we think they mean, with different languages having different meanings, with different words with different meanings. Therefore, no words have any meaning. I wish I were making this up. Failing that, I wish I could have been the fifth grade teacher for these academics, writers, journalists, and politicians, so I could have saved them from embarrassing themselves as adults by showing publicly they don't know how definitions work. Before allowing them to pass fifth grade, I would have taught them, as Mrs. Feldman taught me, and presumably her own fifth grade teacher had taught her, that we individually and collectively learn the definitions of words so we can communicate clearly and concisely with each other. I would have also taught these students, as Mrs. Feldman taught us, that in order for definitions to allow us to communicate clearly and concisely, definitions follow some basic rules. First, it's not only nonsensical but dangerous to pretend that any word simply means whatever anyone says it means. That makes communication impossible. Let's say you define the word delicious to mean supremely yummy. You define it that way. And I define the word delicious to mean highly toxic. I tell you, this mushroom is delicious. You eat it because to you that means supremely yummy. You expected a chanterelle and you got a death cap. The good news is that you learned the truth of that old mycology saying, all mushrooms are edible, but some are only edible once. And I'm not dangerous but stupid. I ask if you want to play football and you show up in a helmet and cleats and I show up on skates with a hockey stick. Football means whatever you want, bigot. We see it makes no sense that a word means whatever anybody wants it to mean. But when it comes to the word woman, suddenly all these journalists, writers, academics, and politicians become, as R.D. Laing put it, imbeciles with high IQs. Is this stove hot? No. Ow, that hurts. Of course it hurts. In an upside down world where women can have penises, any word can mean anything. So I declare that every no means yes, which of course is the core message of rape culture. I was taught that every definition has at least 3 requirements. If my definition doesn't fit all 3, the definition fails, and so did my homework for Mrs. Feldman. The first is that the definition be precise. It doesn't do anybody any good to define a triangle as a shape. What sort of shape? Is it round? Does it have 4 sides? How do we differentiate a triangle from a circular rectangle? If I would have told Mrs. Feldman that because there are big triangles and small triangles, and because there are red triangles and black triangles, we cannot tell what's a triangle, she would have laughed at me. And if I would have told her that triangles are so complex that it's not possible to define a triangle, or that it's what everybody says it is, or that it's a word and words mean whatever we think they mean, if I would have said, as did Jackson, I cannot define triangle, Mrs. Feldman would have flunked my homework. And when I showed my mom the grade, I could have tried to tell my mom that because grades are on a spectrum from A to F, it's not possible to differentiate between an A and an F. After which my mom would also have laughed at me and then replied that since time is on a spectrum with infinitely small gradations from 6 to 10 p.m., I clearly won't care if my bedtime is now moved from 10 to 6, since it's obviously impossible to differentiate between those 2 times. Then she could also have taught me the meaning of the phrase poetic justice. Woman equals adult human female past the requirement that definitions be precise. The definitions, such as they are, proposed by academics, writers, journalists, and politicians don't. The second requirement is that a definition be falsifiable. Definition comes from the Latin definere, to limit, determine, explain, with finere meaning to set bounds, to limit, from finis, that which divides a boundary, a border, a limit, an end, a close. You may recognize finis from the word finish. Part of the way we define something is by setting its boundaries. This is the thing, that is not the thing. We describe the limits of this thing, where this thing ends and that thing, indeed everything that's not this thing, begins. It's fine to argue about these definitions. Lawyers do it all the time. My client's actions did not fit the definition of first-degree murder. We all do it all the time. You were late to my party. I was only 15 minutes late, which I count as on time. Or Jimmy, did you steal your brother's cookie? No, I only borrowed it. Did you eat it? Yes. Then you didn't borrow, did you? But if you're going to argue about definitions, the definitions have to be falsifiable, which means the statement, this thing is X, must be able to be shown to be false under some circumstances. I can say the baseball I'm holding in my hand is in fact a triangle. And a friend can respond, that baseball you're holding in your hand isn't a closed plane figure with 3 sides and 3 straight sides and 3 interior angles. Therefore, no matter how much you say it's a triangle or that identifies a triangle or that you identify as a triangle, or that you insist there's a spectrum whereby shapes morph from baseball to triangle. The baseball you're holding in your hand isn't a triangle. This is all, I can't even believe I have to say this to adults, but I'm going to say it a couple more times. I tell you, I'm a vegan, and a vegan is somebody who consumes no animal products. You ask, what did you have for dinner? I say corned beef and some ribs. You say, no, you're not a vegan. That definition of vegan is falsifiable. I say, I'm a Major League Hall of Fame baseball player. And you say, were you voted into the Hall of Fame? I say, no, I never played baseball past Little League, but I always knew when I was a baby, I was really an MLB Hall of Famer. But when it comes to a woman, these lefty academics, journalists, writers, and politicians, they all do this. They need to go back to 5th grade. Now, the third requirement, and this is really the reason I'm telling you all this, is the definition must not be tautological. What is a tautology? A tautology is a tautology. Duh. No, it's using the thing to define itself, saying a triangle is that thing we identify as a triangle. Crohn's disease is a disease we call Crohn's. A dog is a creature we call a dog. These tautological pseudo-definitions convey no useful information, except that they communicate that the person saying it is either doesn't know what he or she's talking about or is coming to bamboozle you. They fail a basic requirement of what constitutes a definition. A woman is anybody who identifies as a woman is not an absurd definition of woman. It's literally not a definition at all. If I would have said to Mrs. Feldman, a soda can is what we define as a soda can, she would have given me another F. And I can hear you saying, but aren't some definitions unfalsifiable? And I agree completely. I struggled for many months with the difference in terms of falsifiability between a man saying I'm gay versus a man saying I'm a woman. And when the difference came clear to me, it was, and this is so often the truth, simple and straightforward. There's a difference between an attraction or preference on one hand and a state of being on the other. A man can say to me, I like to have sex with men. I cannot argue with what he does or doesn't like. What someone does or doesn't like isn't always falsifiable. I've known plenty, a few actually, of privately gay public figures who, because they were afraid what would happen to them if the public knew about their attraction to men, they didn't have sex with men, but they were married to women. And so their statement of, to me privately, of I find men more attractive than I find women isn't falsifiable, not only because I can't be inside their heads, but also because sometimes actions don't represent preferences. And a trivial example, I love potato chips. You say, well, Derek, how often do you eat potato chips? And I would say not very often because I have diabetes and I can't eat potatoes. But that doesn't alter the fact that I love potato chips. One more example. I can say, a man can say, I wish I were born a woman. And that's fine. That's a statement of preference. Nobody can disagree with that. I can say, I wish I would have been a world-class high jumper. Nobody can disagree with that. But if I were to say I was a world-class high jumper, you could say, how high was your highest jump? And I would say, well, about 1.2 feet below the world record. And you'd say, did you make nationals even? I would say, no, I was like 6 inches under the qualifying. And I would show I wasn't a world-class high jumper, but that's not a state of being. There's a difference between a state of attraction and a state of being, and that's really crucial. And then there's one more answer that lefties often give to one more definition they give of women, which is if somebody asks, what is a woman? They'll threaten to rape and kill the woman who asked it, and they will attempt to destroy their lives. So I guess the real definition of woman these days is someone who is held by this culture in such contempt that no one is even allowed to speak her name.